How's it going, folks? I'm Des with DesFit, and this is the brand new Suunto 9 Peak GPS sport watch, and it comes with all the features that were found on the original Suunto 9 Barrow multi-sport watch, like lots of sport profiles including open water swimming as well as triathlon modes, a barometric altimeter, 100 meters of water resistance, a sapphire crystal display, as well as a stainless steel bezel, and put that all into a much more reasonably sized case with a brand new design that looks svelte and minimalistic. And then for software features, there's a new snap to route feature which creates some nice clean GPS tracks, especially if you live in an area where GPS reception can be a little bit iffy, as well as a new Ghost Runner virtual pacer sort of feature. And we'll talk about both of those here in just one bit, but those actually aren't exclusive to the Suunto 9 Peak. Those are also available on the original Suunto 9 Barrow via a recent firmware update. So in today's video, I'll be going over all the new features of the Suunto 9 Peak, as well as how it performed in sports and fitness capacity for GPS, heart rate, as well as altimeter accuracy for running, cycling, weight training, as well as swimming. And if the information in this video does help you out at all, don't be shy about hitting that like button down below, as it definitely helps the channel a lot and I appreciate it. The Suunto 9 Peak really is all about this new hardware, so they basically just shrunk the original Suunto 9 down to something that's much more wearable versus the original watch, which is kind of a beast of a watch. And for comparison, the case size is nearly identical to the Garmin Forerunner 945 LT right here, and it's also a bit thinner. And this is the black stainless steel version that comes in at 62 grams, and there's also a titanium version that comes in at 52 grams. The watch strap material is nice and soft, it's flexible, and it's still stretchy enough that it keeps it secure in your wrist. And these are removable straps, so you can replace these with whatever you'd like. And like I mentioned before, it's water resistant down to 100 meters, and it comes with a display that's protected by a sapphire glass, which is awesome to see, so it should be super durable. The 1.2-inch display is actually a smidge smaller than the original Suunto 9, and they did get rid of the flat tire on the bottom, but the bezel on the outside of the display does sort of stick out a bit. The display is amazing to see outside, but it can be a little bit more challenging to see inside, especially if the backlight is not enabled, but it does come with a new ambient light sensor which can automatically adjust the backlight based on your light conditions. You'll interact with it using a combination of 3 physical buttons along with the touchscreen, and the touchscreen responsiveness is pretty good. No real complaints there, but this display is a fingerprint magnet like no other, so I actually have to pre-apologize for any smudges that you'll see later on in the video. But one of my favorite things about the redesign with the Suunto 9 Peak are these buttons, and seriously, these buttons are pretty good. First off, they are super clicky, like some of the clickiest buttons I've ever used, and a complete departure from the buttons on the Suunto 9 Barrow, which kind of feel like marshmallows. The other thing I like about these buttons is that they're situated lower on the case than almost any other watch, nearly flush with your skin, which in general I find to be a good thing because they don't have a tendency of getting caught on sleeves. However, if you're wearing the watch on your left wrist and your wrist bone protrudes a bit like mine does, you could potentially feel it. The Suunto 9 also comes with this new LifeQ heart rate sensor that can also measure your blood oxygen saturation levels, and we'll get into the heart rate accuracy in just a bit, but for the SpO2 accuracy, I found it to be reasonably close to a medical grade fingertip SpO2 sensor. To give a quick tour of the interface, by pressing the down key, you can access different widgets where you can see different types of information like your heart rate as well as your blood oxygen saturation level. You can see your heart rate over time, and you can also see your calorie consumption per hour. The next display shows your current stress and recovery state. So right now it says I'm recovering, but this can say anything from active, inactive, recovery, or stressed. And this little ring on the outside indicates your current resource level. And then you can also see your resources over time. So you can basically think of resources like something like Garmin's body battery, which indicates your energy levels throughout the day. Next up, you can see your steps for the day, as well as steps and calories for the last 7 days. And then there's also a training insight widget that shows your training time over the last 7 days, estimated recovery time, your training time for the week in a nice chart. And then you can also see a summary of your training time, distance, as well as calories burned for the week. The next display shows your current altitude as well as barometer reading, temperature and altitude graph over time, as well as your barometer over time. And the Suunto 9 Peak also can track your sleep, and this is actually very close to the sleep duration that I had last night. And you can see a little bit more information in the app, but it's not quite as in-depth as what you can see from some other companies. And then finally, there's your current fitness level, but this is a bit lower than what my other devices report back to me, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on with their algorithm there. And then when you press the up key from the main watch face, here's where you can access the list of workout profiles, and there's a ton to choose from, including all the standard stuff that you'd expect. And it also does have an open water swimming profile as well as a triathlon mode. And then next up is the navigation menu, where you can access points of interest, routes, a compass, and bearing. Your logbook is your activity history, and I guess I'll just bring this up right now because you can see that the interface is kind of slow. It's just not the kind of experience I would expect from a new device that's coming out in 2021. And then next up is a timer, and then there's also the settings menu. And one thing I do want to point out in this menu is that it can pair with some external sensors, but only Bluetooth sensors. There's no Ant Plus love here. Oh, and it also can receive one-way phone notifications, including text and call alerts. Okay, so now let's talk about this new snap to route feature. And one thing that this feature will do is create nice, clean GPS tracks when you go to save your activity, but you do have to load in a route beforehand. And where this feature can be particularly useful is going to be in areas where GPS coverage can be a little bit iffy, like around really tall buildings. And what this feature will do is lock your GPS track to that predefined route as long as you don't veer off 100 meters from that route. And if you do happen to veer off, it'll just start to use normal GPS to track your activity. And then if you get within 20 meters back on your route, then it'll lock back onto that predefined route. But it also can help in a race situation where it can provide better data for pacing. So if your watch happens to have bad GPS reception, what can happen is that your watch may be showing a higher or lower total distance, which can kind of screw up your pacing strategy for the rest of your race. And that's where snap to route can also be helpful. And then for battery life for tracking outdoor activities, GPS battery life is pretty respectable with up to 25 hours in performance mode, which is basically the highest precision possible. Then it trickles down with different predefined battery modes, and you can also set up custom battery modes. Everyday battery life isn't quite as impressive though, with up to 7 days if you're going to be using it to track your heart rate 24/7 as well as receive phone notifications. And that's without tracking any outdoor activities. So for a more real life example, I had a full charge in this about 2 days ago, and I've used it to track about 3.5 hours of outdoor activities as well as about 3 hours of indoor activities. And I currently have just a little over 60% of the battery left. So I expect to get maybe a little over 5 days out of it. They do claim that you can get up to 14 days out of it, but that's without receiving any phone notifications, without 24/7 tracking, and obviously not recording any outdoor activities. However, there is a new fast charging option with the Suunto 9, so that definitely can help out in that department. And for a couple more miscellaneous items, the Suunto 9 Peak also comes with a new ambient light sensor, which can automatically enable the backlight based on your light conditions. It also now can do over-the-air firmware updates, which is basically what every other watch manufacturer has been doing for the last 3 years. And it also has a new Ghost Runner virtual pacer sort of feature, but that feature isn't exclusive to the Suunto 9 Peak. That is also available on the original Suunto 9 Barrow. Okay, so now with all that out of the way, let's talk about how the Suunto 9 Peak actually performs in the sports and fitness capacity. And we're first going to start out with GPS performance. So let's first start out with some running. So on this run here, things were perfectly fine and everything was good to go. And then for some longer examples, here's a road ride where the total distance lined up, but the elevation did come up a bit short. So I went out the next day after resetting the altitude manually, and the exact same thing happened where it was kind of low compared to the other test devices, as well as Strava's corrected elevation figure. So you may not get full credit for elevation gain with this device. And then for the actual GPS tracks, nothing crazy going on from a high level where it looks okay, but it did have a tendency to overshoot some corners. It wasn't drastic corner cutting or overshooting, but it was sort of consistent. And then I did see sort of the same thing here on this road run, but I also saw that it was kind of wobbly in some spots on some straight sections. And then for heart rate, actually, what I typically do is start out with the easiest activity for a wrist-based heart rate sensor to get right, and that's going to be indoor cycling, just because there's very few variables involved, and I rarely see a watch mess this up, so it just provides a nice baseline. But as you can see, it didn't do all that great. It was a little late to the party at the beginning, and then it was a bit shaky for a while, and then it kind of missed the boat on this first interval, although it did get back in line for a bit. And then on this interval, again, it missed the mark, and same thing goes for this interval right here, and then it had a pretty decent drop right here. So that was indoor cycling. So how about road biking outdoors? Well, over the course of nearly this entire ride, you can see that it just wasn't quite right. And whenever I see something funky like this, I just make sure to go test it again in case I was doing something wrong myself. So on this ride, I swapped the watch to my other wrist, and we see basically the exact same thing, but maybe a little bit worse this time. But it was interesting though, because with running, I actually saw better results, at least for the second half, but it did wobble a smidge for the first half. Still much better than those cycling results. And I think the reason that the running test was better than the cycling examples is it was a steady state run, and where I saw the biggest issues is with rapid changes in heart rate with both the indoor and outdoor rides. And the sensor also really didn't handle road vibrations well while riding outside. And then for weight training, nearly all wrist-based heart rate sensors don't do well with this type of activity, so this is kind of par for the course, so no points docked here. And then for swimming, I don't look for perfection here, more that just the heart rate follows along the trends, and although there wasn't anything too wild, it wasn't all that great either at following along the trends when it comes to the rise and falls in heart rate. And while we're talking about swimming, the Suunto 9 did just fine here with automatic lap detection in the pool, where it gives all the detail you'd want, including heart rate, pace, as well as a nice breakdown of intervals, including your stroke time. So what are my thoughts on the Suunto 9 Peak? Well, I think it's great that they crammed everything from the Suunto 9 Barrow into a much smaller case and it's a lot more wearable. The build quality is fantastic and I think it looks really good. GPS performance was reasonable, not the best I've seen, but I think it's perfectly acceptable, but I wasn't as stoked on the heart rate performance, and that was mainly due to how it handled rapid changes in heart rate as well as vibrations in the road. And I think the innovation with the snap to route feature is really cool. Don't get me wrong. I think there's some really cool stuff there, but I would have liked to see a little bit more, like maybe some maps, maybe some music, maybe some AMP Plus support, and possibly a snappier interface. Anyhow, if you liked the video, if you found the information in this video useful, make sure to hit that like button down below and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos just like this. In the meantime, have fun out there and we will see you in the next video.